My boyfriend told me he loved me, promised we'd survive long distance, watched me move to another country without even calling once, and now just lurks on my stories like I'm some girl he used to know. Since we reconnected, things between us have never really fit into a traditional box. Even though I sometimes call him my boyfriend when I explain things to other people, we've never actually used boyfriend or girlfriend with each other. It always felt more complicated than that. We met in college 7 years ago and became really close friends first. After graduation, we even worked together for a couple of years, which made us even tighter. But eventually I hit a point where I felt stuck in life. I quit that job, changed directions completely, and distanced myself from almost everything tied to that time, including him at least a little. We didn't stop talking entirely, but the connection faded into occasional messages instead of daily life. Then on my 23rd birthday, we properly reconnected. It felt surprisingly natural, like no time had passed. From there, things slowly turned romantic, and we've now been dating for over a year. From the very beginning, though, our relationship has been non-monogamous. He had always been monogamous before me, but I introduced him to the idea of polyamory. He was hesitant at first, but he said he wanted to try because he really liked me and didn't want to lose what we had. Since then, we've both seen other people, but at the same time we built something that still felt deeply committed. Over time, he started realizing that non-monogamy didn't mean we were casual or replaceable. We showed up for each other emotionally, supported each other through stress, celebrated milestones, and built routines together. I met some of his family, spent holidays around his circle, and we functioned in many ways like a long-term couple, just without the label. Labels themselves became a recurring conversation. For me, being called boyfriend and girlfriend doesn't feel essential. I care more about how we treat each other than what we call it. For him, though, labels seem to carry a lot of weight. He once told me that if we officially labeled a relationship, it would mean we'd need to have serious conversations about long-term life goals, compatibility, and the future. From his perspective, calling someone your girlfriend is almost like being halfway to engagement, especially in the eyes of his family and friends. I didn't fully agree, but I understood that this is how he sees relationships. And because our dynamic was already unconventional, I sometimes told myself that maybe traditional expectations just didn't apply to us. Maybe that was naive. Maybe I was just trying to make everything make sense. For a long time, I had been planning to study abroad. It was one of those goals I talked about for years, something I really wanted for myself, both academically and personally. When I first mentioned the possibility to him, this was even before we officially started dating, he enthusiastically said he would come with me. He joked about finding work there, or at least visiting, making it sound like an adventure we'd share. At the time, I didn't take it too literally, but it still planted this idea in my head that he'd want to be part of that chapter. Fast forward to now. I finally made it happen. I moved abroad for 6 months. But instead of feeling supported, I suddenly felt like I was leaving alone in a much deeper sense than I expected. Before I left, we talked about everything. Our fears, the distance, whether the relationship was strong enough, and how we'd stay connected. We both acknowledged that visiting might be hard for him because of work and finances, but we agreed we'd keep in touch and make an effort. I even tried to slowly build the habit of more consistent communication. Neither of us loves texting every day, and we're both the kind of people who can go quiet for a bit without it meaning anything. Still, I suggested we try weekly phone calls just to maintain a sense of closeness once I was gone. The last time I saw him in person was almost a month ago. I went to his house to spend time together, knowing the move was getting close. When he dropped me off at the train station afterward, he said, very casually but also strangely final, that it was a goodbye. I remember feeling confused immediately. I told him it wasn't really goodbye yet, I still had a couple of weeks before leaving the country. I suggested we could see each other again before then, even briefly. He shrugged and said he'd probably be busy with work, but we could wait and see. Life got hectic for both of us. I was juggling work deadlines, packing, paperwork, and the emotional chaos of preparing to move abroad. He was busy too. A week went by without us talking, which honestly wasn't that unusual for us. In the past, that kind of gap never felt threatening. But this time, it felt different. Once I arrived here, I expected we'd naturally fall into some kind of rhythm, messages, occasional calls, something. Instead, he's barely responding. Sometimes my texts go unanswered for days. There's no mention of visiting. No real curiosity about my life here. It feels like the emotional connection we built over the past year has just stalled. About a week after I arrived abroad, the silence started bothering me enough that I decided to call him. He didn't answer. At first, I brushed it off and assumed he was just busy with work or asleep. That wouldn't be unusual. But the next day, instead of calling me back, he sent a text saying he'd call me in 2 days and asked if I'd be available in the afternoon. That alone already felt strange. We had never needed to schedule calls before. If we wanted to talk, we just called or sent a quick, "Are you free?" text. The formality of it made it feel less like he missed me and more like he was trying to fit me somewhere between other obligations. Still, I didn't want to make it a big deal, so I said okay. Then the very next day, he texted again saying he actually couldn't do the afternoon anymore and asked if we could do it at night instead. That's when I started to feel irritated. I also have a life here. I'm in a new country, adjusting to classes, paperwork, housing, and trying to build some kind of routine. I wasn't going to reorganize my entire day for a call that might not even happen. So I answered honestly that I didn't know yet. It would depend on the time, because I had plans that evening. I wasn't trying to be difficult. I just didn't want to promise something I couldn't guarantee. And, honestly, this situation wasn't new. Since the very beginning of our relationship, the one consistent problem between us has been his inability to keep his word with plans. It doesn't just happen with me, it happens with everyone in his life. He'll agree to things and then cancel last minute, or sometimes not cancel at all, and simply disappear. He used to show up late constantly, too. We've had multiple fights about this, and for a while it actually seemed like he was improving. He'd started being more honest about his limits, saying no when he didn't have the energy, and communicating better instead of overcommitting. Because of that progress, I really believed we had moved past this phase. I try to be understanding, telling myself that maybe it's a mix of FOMO, people-pleasing, and maybe some kind of neurodivergence that makes time management harder for him. I don't know for sure, but I always tried to give him the benefit of the doubt, because aside from this issue, our relationship had always felt supportive and emotionally close. The night we were supposed to talk finally came. My plans ended earlier than expected, so I texted him letting him know I was available after all. No response. I waited. Hours passed. Still nothing. Eventually, right before going to sleep, I sent another message saying I was heading to bed. He still didn't respond. The next day came and went. By the middle of the afternoon, I still hadn't heard from him. That's when the frustration really set in. It wasn't even about the missed call anymore. It was about the feeling of being ignored and left in limbo again. So I sent a simple message. "Why are you so bad at communicating?" He replied almost immediately. Suddenly, he was available to answer. He apologized and said he had fallen asleep, that work had been overwhelming, that he was exhausted, and that he was sorry for, maybe being selfish. He added that maybe he would be available at the end of the week instead. Reading that made me feel both angry and tired at the same time. I wasn't upset that he was tired or busy. Those are normal parts of life. What upset me was the lack of communication and the repeated pattern of leaving me hanging. So I replied with several paragraphs, trying to explain calmly, but clearly how I felt. I told him that being tired or having a lot of work is not selfish at all. What feels selfish is putting me in a position where I have to chase him for basic communication, especially when we had already talked about how important this was to me. I explained that it's exhausting to keep having the same conversation over and over again, and that I don't need long calls or constant texting. I just need clarity and honesty. I also reminded him that the reason I wanted to talk wasn't random. We had said we'd wait and see if we could see each other one more time before I left. At that point, I had pretty much accepted that it probably wouldn't happen, but I wanted him to say it clearly instead of disappearing and leaving me to figure it out alone. I told him I hate having to fill in the blanks when someone doesn't communicate because my brain automatically starts making assumptions, and those assumptions usually hurt more than the truth would. When he mentioned maybe talking at the end of the week, I pointed out that by then I would already be in another country. I said honestly that I didn't even know if I would answer his call at that point, not out of spite, but because I didn't know what my schedule or emotional state would be. And realistically, I also didn't know if he would actually call at all. He answered again with another apology. He thanked me for my honesty and said he didn't have time right then to respond to everything I had written, but that he loved me and was grateful to have me in his life. And that message left me feeling strangely hollow. On paper, it sounded sweet. Those are the kinds of words you're supposed to want to hear. But something about it felt incomplete, almost like an emotional bandage instead of a real response. He didn't address the practical issues, didn't clarify anything about the missed call or future communication, and didn't actually engage with what I had said. It felt like he acknowledged my feelings without taking responsibility for the situation. By the time the end of the week he mentioned finally arrived, I was already abroad. I had taken the flight, landed, and started settling into this new place, and still there was nothing from him. No call, no message, not even a simple safe travels. Normally, I don't obsess over those gestures, and honestly, it hadn't even crossed my mind until I was talking to friends, and they asked if he'd texted me before my trip. That was when I realized he hadn't. Still, I tried not to overthink it. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he'd call later. But the call never came. Instead, I eventually received a text saying he hoped I wasn't holding a grudge, and that what had happened was just a lack of communicating our desires to each other. I stared at the message, confused. That didn't feel like a mutual misunderstanding. It felt like he hadn't followed through again. I was so tired of the situation that instead of responding seriously, I just sent a dumb, "Your mom" joke. It was immature, but I didn't have the energy for another heavy conversation. After that, I sent him an audio explaining I was already abroad. I reminded him that earlier I'd said I might not answer because a friend would be visiting, but I'd mixed up the days. My friend wasn't there yet, so I actually had been available. Even as I spoke, I felt awkward, like I was explaining myself for a call he hadn't even tried to make. He didn't answer. The silence made me feel embarrassingly exposed, like I'd shown I cared, and it had just disappeared into nothing. I wished I hadn't sent the audio at all. A couple of days later, my friend arrived, and I focused on enjoying the visit. We went out, laughed, explored, and posted pictures. I tried to stay present and not think about him. Then I noticed he was watching and liking my Instagram stories. Eventually, he even replied to one, telling me to have fun, and saying he loved me a lot. That only confused me more. How could he act affectionate in these small online moments while ignoring the bigger, unresolved thing between us? One night, while my friend and I were drinking and gossiping, I showed her his Hinge profile. We started joking about it, and somehow we came up with the idea of writing him a mock formal email listing areas for improvement, like a performance review. The idea made us laugh so much that for a moment the frustration felt lighter. We even considered actually sending it. But in the end, I couldn't. I knew that underneath the joke, it might hurt his feelings, and I didn't want that. So instead, I texted him saying we'd been writing him an email and that I was laughing really hard. He replied briefly that he was really overwhelmed, that the week had been tough, but he'd check it out. Of course, there was nothing to check out. We hadn't sent anything. That was the last time we spoke. Since then, I've been stuck with this strange mix of concern and embarrassment. I want to be supportive. I know he's under pressure at work and I care about him. I want to be someone who gives him strength during difficult times. But it's hard to show up for him when I feel like I'm the only one holding onto the thread between us. I feel embarrassed explaining the situation to friends, embarrassed not knowing where I stand, embarrassed that I keep hoping for a level of communication that doesn't seem to come. I don't want to break up with him. If I didn't care, this would be simple. But I do care, and that's what makes it so confusing. I keep wondering if this is fixable, even though it's a recurring issue we've talked about before. I don't know what my next step should be. Do I reach out again? Do I wait and see how long he goes without contacting me? Is waiting just avoiding the truth? Or am I somehow failing to communicate clearly, even though it feels like I've explained this over and over? When I lay out the timeline, it feels strangely simple. Week 1, we don't talk after saying goodbye at his house. Week 2, he says he'll call, but he doesn't. Week 3, we text about him letting me down. By the end of the week, I'm already abroad and still no call. Week 4, he replies to my Instagram story like nothing happened, and our last exchange is the brief text about the imaginary email. Nothing dramatic, no big fight, no clear ending. Just missed calls, delayed replies, and silence stretching longer than it should. And now I'm here, in another country, wondering whether this relationship is just going through a stressful phase, or quietly fading while I'm still trying to hold it in place.